Pantera, the originators of groove metal. During their heyday in the 90s, few bands could touch the ferocity and sheer power intermingled with the highly sophisticated stylings of Dimebag Darrel Abbott's guitar work, who is still to this day considered by many to be among the finest to ever strap on a six-string. His brother Vinnie and bassist Rex Brown would make up the most formidable rhythm section in the whole of metal. Add to this constant abuse and noise the rage and passion coming out of Phil Anselmo, and we would end up with a soundtrack for the disaffected. A loud, brutal, jaw-dropping face punch of Texas crunch. And I, for one, am so happy that I was alive to bear witness to it all, growing up in Houston, Texas. Come with me on this journey of information as we discover the birth and the demise of the Texas Giant, and go in depth on what the band considers their debut album on Don't Miss Albums. Rex Brown was born in 1964 and grew up in De Leon, Texas, about 2.5 hours southwest of Dallas. His father was 40 when Brown was born, and his sister got married and moved out of the house when he was only 3 years old. In his memoir, Official Truth, 101 Proof, Brown recalls being surrounded by music as a kid, from the Louis Armstrong and Tommy Dorsey records his mother loved, to the Beatles singles his sister left behind, to the Charles Mingus records his grandmother would play along with as Brown sat on her knee at the piano. Tragedy struck the family in 1971. Brown's father, whom he called Daddy Bill, was diagnosed with cancer of the sinus cavity, a rapidly moving strain of the disease that killed him in January 1972 when Brown was just 7 years old. Throughout his father's treatment, Brown's parents tried to keep up a veneer of normalcy, and when Daddy Bill's condition worsened, Brown was sent off to stay with a series of relatives, and had very little idea of the extent to which his father's health was deteriorating. Brown was playing in the yard when his mother came out to tell him his father had died. Although I was still young, he wrote, I can still vividly remember that the first thing my mother said was, "I don't know what I'm going to do." I didn't have an answer. I was a kid. I kept playing. The Abbott brothers were born into music, with Jerry Abbott, a country songwriter and producer, being their father. Vinnie, the older brother, was born in Abilene, Texas in 1964, followed shortly by Darrel in 1966 out of Ennis, Texas. The Abbott's parents divorced in 1979 after 17 years of marriage, but their family life remained happy. The brothers lived with their mother Carolyn in a ranch-style house on Monterey Street in Arlington, Texas. Carolyn was supportive of her son's musical endeavors. Jerry remained in the area after the divorce, and Darrel would often go on his bicycle to visit him for guitar lessons. Darrel had previously tried to play the drums, and Vinnie would later say, "I just got better than him and wouldn't let him play him anymore." Darrel took up the guitar when he was 12. His first guitar was a Les Paul-style Hondo, which he received along with a pig-nose amplifier on his 12th birthday. Influenced by Black Sabbath, Judas Priest, Kiss, and Van Halen, he would initially spend time in his room standing in front of a mirror holding the guitar while wearing Ace Frehley-style makeup, though he was unable to play the instrument at the time. Jerry learned Kiss songs on guitar in order to teach Darrel how to play them. Darrel also learned from country musicians who recorded at Jerry's studio, such as Bugs Henderson. Vinnie originally played the tuba, but was directed towards the drums by his father, who said there were just no career prospects for a tuba player, so his father bought him his first drum kit. Vinnie has cited Peter Criss, Alex Van Halen, and Tommy Aldridge as his biggest influence as a drummer. Vinnie said in a 2016 interview that he and Darrel were inseparable after they began playing music together. At age 14, Darrel entered a guitar contest at the Agora Ballroom in Dallas, in which Dean Zielinski, founder of Dean Guitars, was one of the judges. He won the competition. Zielinski recalled that Darrel blew everybody away. He won many other guitar contests in the area and was eventually asked not to compete anymore and instead judge the competition so that others could win. Phil Anselmo was born in New Orleans, Louisiana in 1968. His father owned and operated a well-known eatery in the New Orleans suburb of Metairie, Louisiana, called Anselmo's, which closed permanently due to Hurricane Katrina. He also owned Sea Beaver's Bar in Metairie and New Orleans bar The Library. Phil Sr. passed away January of 2021. Phil worked on a shrimp boat with his stepfather in his teenage years, but knew that music was the direction he wanted to pursue. He'd drop out of Grace King High School in Metairie during his senior year and continue his passion for music in band Sam Hain, not the Glenn Danzig Sam Hain that we now know, though. Phil would take the vocal and guitar duties. Shortly after, he would join band Rapid Phase, who would later rename themselves to Razor White after one of the songs that Phil wrote. While they did have some original material, they mainly played cover songs of popular rock and metal bands. After about a year with the band, he became frustrated with Razor White's direction and began to explore other options. In 1981, back in Dallas, Pantera was being formed. Vinnie was asked to join a band alongside his high school classmates Terry Glaze on guitar, Tommy Bradford on bass, and Donnie Hart on vocals. Vinnie accepted the invitation, but on the condition that Darrel would also join the band. Glaze later recalled that they were very unsure about this request, as Darrel wasn't very good and 2 years their junior, was a little skinny, scrawny dude, but they ultimately agreed. By 1982, Hart left the band and was replaced by Glaze on vocals, while Rex Brown took Bradford's place as bassist. Abbott originally shared lead guitar with Glaze, but soon took permanent status as lead guitarist. Glaze said Darrel just morphed over a 6-month period. When he came out, he could play like Eruption and Crazy Train. Darrel adopted the stage name Diamond Darrel in reference to the Kiss song Black Diamond. Inspired by Kiss, Van Halen, and Judas Priest, Pantera originally had a glam metal style and was very image conscious. The members wore spandex, makeup, and hairspray when on stage. The band signed to Metal Magic Records, which was created by Jerry Eldon, an alias of the Abbott's father, Jerry. Jerry also served as the band's manager and producer during this time. Pantera released its first album, Metal Magic, in 1983, when Darrel was just 16. Pantera released Projects in the Jungle, and I Am the Night. In 1984 and 1985, respectively. Both albums followed the same glam metal style and were comparable to Shout at the Devil era Motley Crue, although I Am the Night had a slightly heavier sound than the previous releases. Around this time, the Abbott brothers began listening to bands such as Metallica and Slayer. Darrel was particularly taken by the Metallica's Ride the Lightning album. Glaze was unhappy with the Abbott brothers' desire to move towards a heavier sound. He later said he didn't want to go that heavy. I didn't like it as well if the guitar was the main thing, like the Metallica songs. This conflict, along with the contractual dispute, led to his departure in 1986. Pantera began a search for Glaze's replacement and initially auditioned Matt Lamore, a David Coverdale lookalike. He sang a number of shows with the band in Los Angeles during the winter of 1986, but it became somewhat apparent that Lamore couldn't hit those high notes that Glaze was capable of. Together with his lack of stage presence, this meant that Pantera could only play cover songs, leading to Lamore's departure. Pantera next auditioned El Paso native Rick Mathiasen, later to sing for Steel Prophet and Agent Steel. However, cultural and image differences, being that Mathiasen failed to adapt to the southern culture of the other members, meant his tenure was even shorter than that of Lamore's. A former schoolmate of the Abbott brothers, David Peacock of the band Forced Entry, joined the band as lead vocalist in the spring of 1986, but despite Pantera doing most of the work for their fourth album during the summer with Peacock, Rex and the Abbotts found Peacock's voice to be unsuited to the musical direction that Pantera wished for. By the end of the year, Pantera even revisited original frontman Donnie Hart, but Hart himself knew that he was not the right man Pantera was seeking, and Jerry Abbott was to fire him. During 1986, New Orleans native Phil Anselmo had heard Pantera was looking for a singer. At the end of the year, they invited him to audition, and the 18-year-old Anselmo was hired as the new vocalist on the spot. Upon playing with Pantera, Phil immediately clicked with the other three members. The years 1986 and 1987 saw the release of several landmark thrash metal albums that would prove influential to Pantera's developing musical style. Among the most prominent of these were Metallica's Master of Puppets, Slayer's Reign in Blood, Anthrax's Among the Living, and Megadeth's Peace Sells But Who's Buying. When Anselmo joined the band, he would bring his mixtapes with him and play bands such as Ex-Hoarder, Slayer, and Rigor Mortis to the other band members. In 1988, with Anselmo as the new vocalist, Pantera released their fourth studio album, titled Power Metal. Power Metal, like Pantera's previous three albums, was released by Metal Magic Records. By far the band's heaviest album at this point, Power Metal had little resemblance to the power metal subgenre, but was a mix of 1980s glam metal and thrash metal, sometimes blending both styles in a single song. Complementing the band's new sonic approach were Phil's harder-edged vocals compared to those of Terry Glaze. Anselmo didn't write any of the lyrics for Power Metal, and the band was still in the process of distancing themselves from glam metal, but the album evidenced a stylistic change. After the release of Power Metal, the band members decided to seriously reconsider their glam metal image and sound. Referring to the band's spandex appearance, Vinnie Paul remarked at a band meeting that these magic clothes don't play music, we do. Let's just go out there and be comfortable, jeans, t-shirt, whatever, and see where it goes. The band members would later no longer acknowledge their independent releases, including Power Metal, as they sculpted a new, heavier image to accompany their later groove metal sound. Their 4 independent albums are not listed on the band's official website and have become hard-to-find collector's items. Unless, of course, you know where to look. Try Discogs.com for all your hard-to-find music. Shortly after Power Metal was released, Megadeth needed a guitarist and phoned Dimebag Darrel to join the band. Darrell insisted that his brother, bandmate Vinnie Paul, would have to be included. However, Megadeth had already hired Nick Menza as their new drummer, so Darrell declined the offer, and Dave Mustaine instead decided on Marty Friedman. The Abbott brothers refocused their attention on Pantera, and in 1989, they were given their first shot at commercial success. That year was also when the band formed their relationship with Walter O'Brien at Concrete Management, the management arm of Concrete Marketing, who remained their manager until they disbanded in 2003. After being turned down 28 times by every major label on the face of the earth, Atco Records representatives Mark Ross and Stevenson Eugenio were asked by their boss Derek Shulman, who was interested in signing Pantera, to go see the band perform in Texas. Ross was so impressed by the band's performance that he called his boss that night, suggesting that the band should be signed immediately. His exact quote was, By the end of the first song, my jaw was on the floor. The sonic power of it all, the attitude and the musicianship blew me away. Basically, you had to be an idiot to not think they're amazing. I mean, how could you go and see these guys and not think, holy shit? Atco Records accepted, and at the conclusion of 1989, the band recorded its major label debut at Pantego Studios and hired Terry Date to produce it, in large part because of his work with Soundgarden, Metal Church, and Overkill, the latter of whose latest album at the time, The Years of Decay, was one of the sources of inspiration behind Pantera's transition away from the glam traditional heavy metal to the thrash groove metal, as well as Dimebag Darrel's guitar tone on the album. Pantera's initial choice as the producer for Cowboys from Hell was Max Norman, based on his work with Ozzy Osbourne. Norman, who flew to Houston to watch the band perform, initially agreed to work on the album, but right before the recording session started, he was offered to produce Lynch Mob's debut album, Wicked Sensation, instead. I just happened to be at that very show in Houston, unknowingly. During the recording sessions, the band chose a more unorthodox method. Vinnie would come in and record the drum tracks first. Then Darrel would record over the drums. Then Rex would come back and record over the guitars, but not over the drums. This resulted in a much tighter sound. Looking for their first big breakthrough, Pantera released their fifth studio album, Cowboys from Hell, on July 24, 1990. Pantera showed a more extreme style on this outing, leaving behind its glam metal influences in favor of mid-tempo thrash metal dubbed Power Groove by the band. Although Phil still used some Halford, Bach-influenced vocals, he also adopted a more abrasive delivery. Darrel's more complex guitar solos and riffs, along with his brother's faster-paced drum work, were evidence of the band's extreme transformation. The album marked a critical juncture in the band's history. Many fans, and the band itself, have referred to Cowboys from Hell as Pantera's official debut album. The album was co-produced by Terry Date and Pantera. Terry also gets credit for mixing and engineering the album. Terry has worked with Metal Church, The Accused, Soundgarden, Mother Love Bone, and Deftones. Pantera also receives mixing credit. Matt Lane is credited with assistant engineer. Matt has also worked with Violent Femmes, Fate's Warning, Overkill, The Pixies, and The Walkabouts. The album was mastered by Howie Weinberg, who we already know. From 1975's Best of BTO, through Motorhead's Ace of Spades, Rush's Permanent Waves, and Journey's Escape, up to one of his latest releases, The Cult's Under the Midnight Sun. Art direction is credited to Bob Deffrin. Bob was the head of art for Atlantic Records, and has a plethora of credits to his name, including John Prine, AC/DC, Motley Crue, Rat, and Saigon Kick. Photography, front cover and back cover, is credited to the Bettman Archive, which is a collection of photographs started by Dr. Otto Ludwig Bettman in the late 1920s, while head of the rare book department of the Berlin State Art Library. The archive has since been purchased by Corbis, a digital stock photography company founded by Bill Gates. Joe Gyron is credited with photography live photos. Joe has credit with Fifth Angel, Cannibal Corpse, Judas Priest, Dio, and Aaron Lewis. All songs written and arranged by Pantera. Pantera is Phil Anselmo, vocals, Dimebag Darrel Abbott, guitar, Rex Rocker Brown, bass, and Vinnie Paul Abbott, drums. The title track of the album starts off with one of the most recognizable riffs in metal. From the initial note on the album, you know you are in for a ride. Track 2 comes in roaring with the fast-paced primal concrete sledge. I only have 2 issues with this tune. It's too short, and there isn't a full-fledged Dimebag solo. Otherwise, this would be one of my favorites on the album. Everything about track 3, Psycho Holiday, is fantastic. Anselmo's vocals, Dime's minute-long solo, Rex's bass groove, and Vinnie's obvious skins abuse. Damn it! Every time this song comes on, I end up with a hole in the wall that I have to repair. Fuck it, it's worth it. Do you need a break yet? Not quite. The boys decide to rip your head off completely with Heresy coming in at the number 4 spot. Anselmo's Halford Bach-esque vocals make their way into this tune and set it on fire. Brutal, yet humorous track all the way through. The 7-minute-long ballad, Cemetery Gates, melodies its way to one of everybody's favorite Pantera songs at number 5. The beautiful guitar solo, intricately woven vocals, and constant barrage of beats drive this song into everything you would ever want it to be. Pure ecstasy. Number 6's Domination may actually be the song that gave me the light bulb moment on how useful a double bass pedal can be on a drum kit. It is not overly used, but used to the exacting amount, precisely, along with everything else in this 5-minute work of art. Vinnie's wall of concuss is the canvas for the guitar paintbrush, the bass knife, and the vocal gesso. In my humble opinion, Domination is to melting faces as Dolly is to melting clocks.
Agony is the price that you'll pay in the end. Domination consumes you and calls you a friend. It's a twisted fall. Binds your life, steal and manipulates the will to be. And it's hard to see how soon we forget when there's nothing else left to destroy. It's a useless lie. Your eyes will see the dawn of the day and the legend of the wall. Those words that stare into your soul. Ask yourself you will fall. It's domination pushed into living hell.
Shattered at number 7 does exactly what it promises. Make sure your windows are open and your glasses are plastic when you ultimately crank this one up for your neighbors. Oh man, what a gem. Number 8's Clash with Reality riffs its way through the album. Crunch, riff, hit you over the head, repeat. It works well. Medicine Man at number 9 is a heavy creeper. A sense of foreboding presents itself as soon as Phil starts the verses. It's a killer song. No pun intended.
Many distant miles away, past the shores of Everdark, there stays a magic man who bears an evil mark. He helps all concerned, those who come again return, injecting lives while
10 is Message in Blood. The song takes a minute to develop, but once it does, lost in the sauce for show.
There's a place that I keep deep inside me. It can trigger my mind. All along I knew it has been with me since I was just a child. I'm just some bird power within my soul. It has given me life beyond life. I take life from my murderous problem. I take it all always with mine. It's a message in blood. It's your cryptic warning. Within the message in blood. Mossing years of pain and your God-forsaken ending to life.
The guitar-focused ballad The Sleep at number 11 is a beautiful head bob of haunting harmonies, acoustic pickings, and soaring leads.
Understanding what has happened before us, we are confined to where talking into the conquering of our world as we knew it. Rise above this pit of sorrow and pain. Among the few, we are the advanced leaders. We got to live through this trouble and decay. This question haunts my mind. Will we survive this night? We're harboring the meek. Will we survive?
The album ends on track 12's The Art of Shredding, and we are not talking about cheese. This is the thrash metal song of the album, and man, does it leave me wanting more. Time to flip the album over and start the ride all over again.
Unity is a way I think, but I die for society way. The chemical and minority, then what are we supposed to be? All free to be powerless to change the world with our lives in the hands of madmen.
To promote the album, Pantera began the Cowboys from Hell tour by opening for thrash acts Exodus and Suicidal Tendencies. In 1991, Halford performed with the band on stage, which led Pantera, along with Annihilator, to open for Judas Priest on its first show in Europe. In addition, Halford collaborated with Pantera on the song Light Comes Out of Black, which was featured on the soundtrack to the film Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Innocence is falling, rapture's in the past, craving for salvation of their pain. Serenity is gone.
Pantera also opened for other bands like Sepultura, Fate's Warning, Prong, Mind Over 4, and Morbid Angel, and co-headlined a North American tour with Wrathchild America. The band eventually landed a billing for Monsters in Moscow with AC/DC and Metallica in September of 1991, where they played to a crowd of over 500,000 in attendance to celebrate the new freedom of performing Western music in the Soviet Union shortly before its downfall 3 months later. The album would reach number 27 on the Billboard Top Heatseekers chart in 1992 and has since gone on to attain both gold and platinum certifications in the US, as well as gold status in the UK. The album has been praised by most critics as it would prove to be one of the most influential albums in the metal scene in the 90s and of all time, and would inspire a generation of musicians, particularly guitarists. IGN named Cowboys from Hell the 19th most influential heavy metal album of all time. AllMusic said of the album, Pantera's breakthrough album, Cowboys from Hell, is largely driven by the band's powerful rhythm section and guitarist Dimebag Darrel's unbelievably forceful riffing, which skittered around the downbeats to produce unexpected rhythmic phrases and accents, as well as his inventive soloing. Pantera played close to 200 shows supporting Cowboys from Hell, as it toured for nearly 2 years. Aside from breaks to develop new material, the band spent most of the 90s touring. Abbott gained a reputation as a wild figure on tour and a heavy drinker. Pantera were infamous for their hard partying ways, particularly on tour. One of the band's crew once told VH1 in a Behind the Music episode on the band, "They were the only band I've ever known that if you didn't drink, you'd get fired." Pantera's tour rider, which is an artist's contractual demand for items like food and drink at venues, is a virtual liquor store. Backstage, the band demanded liters of whiskey, vodka, and bourbon, plus several cases of beer and several bottles of wine. The band's production office required liters of booze and a bottle of French wine. On stage, they demanded 2 cases of beer and 2 liters of whiskey. These were nightly requirements. Pantera would continue on for a few more albums that I will have to touch on at a later date. So part 2 is to come soon. I'm sure by this point that you've probably already asked yourself, why didn't he highlight the Vulgar Display of Power album? Well, the answer is actually a pretty easy one, not one that you may have thought of. So as you'll recall, Cowboys from Hell was released in July of 1990, and circumstances in life required a tough decision on my part shortly after. I'd been a homeless runaway since I was 16, crashing on couches, eating from dumpsters, and generally being a dipshit kid refusing to grow up. Till one night in November of 1990. After watching the movie Heartbreak Ridge with Clint Eastwood, I decided that if I was going to waste my life on the streets of Houston, Texas and risk jail or worse, death, I might as well waste it for a reason. So I walked to my closest Army recruitment office that very next morning and I signed on the dotted line. I was in Fort Knox, Kentucky a few days later, learning how to operate an M1 Abrams tank and being all I could be. Or so they told me. When Vulgar Display of Power came out, I was knee-deep in so much shit that the music became the background noise to yelling, crying, and loud booms. Chord changes were as muddy as the tracks on the tank, and songs were just splintered fragments of memories, like the targets we would obliterate. I had my last summer to spend with Cowboys from Hell, but I could only play catch-up to Vulgar Display of Power. Of course, I've heard the album, and I would agree completely with everyone that it is a superior album in every way to Cowboys from Hell. I just didn't have the opportunity to create the memories with Vulgar like I did with Cowboys. And like I always say, it's the other places that music takes you that makes music so special. So, we'll come back and focus on Vulgar. Don't you worry about that. I just couldn't make this an hour-long episode. If you like what I'm doing here, join the community. Help me spread the message of listening to albums again, the way they were intended, from the beginning to the end, while reading the credits. If you have an album that you think I need to bring attention to, let me know about it. Post a comment. I highly suggest going for broke on this whole album. And when you do, turn it up so the neighbors can enjoy it too. We'll see you soon. Take care.